Hey there, Jim Johnson for Accent Help here, and we're rolling on the Vowel+R series. So now we're going to get into some specifics. I'm going to be working with lexical set words from J.C. Wells, the linguist, from his Accents of English set. It's actually from Volume 1, if you want to dig into that. But I'm also going to do some variations, some words that I've added because we have some additional variations that he sort of creates as some, in some ways it's in there, but I want to talk about them as subsets within that. Okay, first one up, we're just going to follow up on what I talked about in the intro to this section, which is that when you have this little sort of wingding, that little diacritic added on to the turned epsilon, which is here on the chart, and when you've got it added on to the schwa, which is here on the chart, look at how close they are. They're super duper close to each other, right? Really, the reality is they're pretty much the same sound. Remember, this is supposedly basically where these happen in your mouth, and your mouth ain't that big. And I mean, even you, Nicole, your mouth is not that big. I hope I called out some Nicole just now. So they're super close to each other when you look at the reality of the size of the inside of the mouth, right? They're super duper close to each other. But there's a traditional way that these are used. Traditionally, this one represents the stressed syllable. This one represents the unstressed syllable. So the lexical set words for these are nurse and letter. Letter, the unstressed. You would also have a lot of words that actually have both of these in them, like further, burger, murder, which is what Nicole's thinking about doing right now. Murder. So you can have both of these occur in a word, okay? So that is the basics of those. Let me give you a couple of variations. One of them, so that's just the tradition. How accurate that is, you know, we can debate that. It's what you'll find in pronouncing dictionaries and such. So I'm going to stick with that because it'll match most resources you would look at. All right, so I'm going to go with that, and I'm going to imagine that it's correct, because it's pretty correct-ish, and it's pretty workable. So there we go. Now, I'm going to add a subset to this one, and it's the hurry subset. So there are other words like that, but think of hurry, H-U-R-R-Y, and I, in my own speech, and most Americans would say nurse, hurry, same sound. There's no variation. But for some Americans, not very many, but mostly on the East Coast, mostly up in New England, is where you're going to get all these different alternative vowels. But throughout much of England, you'll get instead something more like hurry. You in a big hurry? Hurry. That's a nurse in a hurry. And what I would write this as is the turned V. This is the Vowel+R concept. It's also really common for people to put a syllable break in between them, indicating that there's a little bit of a separation between the vowel and the R. So, hurry, hurry. You in a big hurry? And I would say, are you in a big hurry? This nurse is in a hurry. This nurse is in a hurry. That would be some accents. Again, largely New Englandy, and then much of England will do that. Okay? So that is the one subset that I'm going to speak about under these main lexical set words of nurse and letter. And I'm bringing these two together because they are almost identical, right? And there can be such confusion between them. Cool. Now, let me talk about this guy just a little bit more. So I'm going to erase hurry for just a moment, or hurried for just a moment. With this one, when we talk about variations in accents, for one thing, when you make it non-rhotic, when you take away the rhoticity, that's something that you can hear in some places, but I will say that for a lot of non-rhotic accents that are in rhotic-centered countries, in other words, what I'm talking about is non-rhotic accents, R-dropping accents in America, basically, that this is the first R that tends to come back on. So like for New Yorkers, this like heard, you might hear somebody say I heard. I heard. So the R could be gone, but mostly you're going to hear I heard. I heard. At least some element of R-ness come back into that. This is the one that in old school New York speech, it wasn't uncommon to hear it become something different, that the stereotype is hoid or moida. We got moida on Toity Toid and Toid Street. So the Bugs Bunny sort of change, right? And that's commonly written as this, like oi. That's what I hoid. I hoid about it on Toity Toid Street, right? So that kind of super strong stereotype. The reality is that the way that that's probably really happening is instead of it being the full-on oi, even though that's the stereotype of it, and there's actually some accents where you'd get the reversal, where for some oi words you would get and this happens in New York and New Orleans actually, where you'll hear people instead of saying toilet actually call it a turlet. If you look at some old All in the Family shows, which supposedly takes place in Queens, very first episode, you hear him say church, and I thought I was in the wrong turlet. So instead of toilet, he says turlet. So, yeah, I think that's the very first episode of All in the Family. So with this one, this is usually the first R that comes on in various accents. When you look at a Boston accent, that's one where they, like classic Boston accent, they would actually do a lot of rounding on it, something along the line of heard, that's what I heard, maybe that far, heard, maybe something along that line. Mostly, that's the first R that comes on, even though classically, and even today, a lot of Boston speakers, they'd say that's pretty hard. You know, they really drop that R, right? But then when they get to a word like word or nurse or hurry, they might say, well, let me take it with, they might say word, nurse, but hurry. Because that's up in that Northeast where they tend to do that variation of these subsets that I'm going to talk about of Vowel+R. Okay, that was maybe even more in depth than what you wanted. Primarily, these are pretty much the same. This is the one that happens in the stressed syllable. This happens in the unstressed syllable. The little wingding thing is the rhoticity, which I talked about previously. And the one variation on this is the hurry, which is also words like courage, courage. If you're eating some curry, some curry. So you can hear it in some other words as well. But that would be the hurry subset underneath the nurse lexical set. There you go. If you want to dive into various accents or generic materials for learning a generic American accent, you can find all this stuff at accenthelp.com.